My name is Erin McCaffrey, and this is my fourth and final defense on my block plan for the mitosis unit. The measurable student outcome for the unit was that 90% of students would pass the summative exam at the end of the unit. In previous units, 75% of students passed the last exam, which was a great improvement from the 20% that passed the first unit exam. This rise in scores came with the implementation of MAST techniques, and with further use of these techniques, the goal was now for 90% of these students to pass. The main learning target was to explain why and how cells divide, connecting to the 7th grade standard 1E about mitosis and referring to standards 2A, 2B, and 3D from the high school science standards on meiosis. As seen in my block plan, at the beginning of each lesson, I started with either an IBE or a hook because research has shown that hooks help link short-term and long-term memory, which may help the students more successfully remember the content. In my focus lesson, I used a hook about X-Men to link together their ideas of mutations to the importance of the correct number of chromosomes. In terms of the IBE, D'Alessandris has shown through research that one way to use IBEs is as a goal-free problem with no explicitly stated unknowns. In this focus lesson, I used an IBE that had them drawing the cell cycle and labeling where the amount of DNA changed. While it was good review to draw the cell cycle, 75% of the students were unsure how to complete the directions. Because of this, I put the activity on hold and decided to come back to it after I taught the lesson. Next time, I will give clear directions of exactly how they should answer the question. So the only obstacle would be whether or not they understand not following the directions. Into my interactive mini lecture, I incorporated JTPS at least once a lesson and used quick checks during whiteboards. Research by Maher has shown that justification of students' ideas, as is required in the JTPS, can result in more sophisticated thinking due to the reorganization of their thoughts that is necessary to do so. In my focus lesson, the first JTPS that I used in this unit was at the beginning of the lesson on cell cycle. After observing in Claire's classroom, I saw that it works well if you very clearly describe the question and give clear directions on who is to share and when they are to share. And because of this, that's what I did on mine. And now I use the document camera to fill in as they're sharing. On the JTPS from my focus lesson on the chromosomes, I used a multiple choice question, an idea I hadn't thought of but I saw in practice in Claire's classroom. It worked well because students could pick a solid answer and then justify why they picked that answer. My 5 focus students all selected an answer and gave a reasonable justification, so it shows that they were thinking about the content. However, 4 out of 5 of my focus students actually left one of the sections blank, including my 2 high achievers. So in the future, I will be sure to articulate it better that they need to be pairing and sharing and taking down everyone's ideas. But the fact that they still were able to give me a think, everyone, whether or not it was correct, shows me that they were in the zone of cell division. Research by Black and William has shown that formative assessment can increase student knowledge and improve understanding, and one of the forms of formative assessment that I use in my classroom are whiteboards. When I had used whiteboards in prior units, there were only enough for 1 whiteboard per table, but this unit I had enough for every student to use one. This was an improvement because engagement moved from between 60 to 80% of students engaged during guided practice using whiteboards and was now up to 90 to 100% of students being engaged. I was also able to use whiteboards for quick checks as all students could answer every question. So during the lesson on chromosomes, I decided to spend more time on reviewing the steps of mitosis because 100% of the students were engaged and they were enjoying using their notes to race to answer the questions correctly. My 2 high-achieving students answered 100% of the questions correctly, whereas my low-achieving students, the 2 of them, answered between 50 and 60% of the questions correctly. This combined with the responses they gave on their JTPSs at the beginning of that lesson led me to know that I had to review the steps of mitosis further. This unit, I incorporated exit slips at the end of every lesson. During my lesson on chromosomes, my focus lesson, I ended with an exit slip about how the amount of DNA changes over the course of the cell cycle. When reviewing my 5 focus students and their answers, 2 out of 5 were able to successfully answer the JTPS at the beginning of the lesson that I just talked about, but 5 out of 5, even my low-achieving students, were able to successfully answer the question on the exit slip. Just the amount of detail varied. So all 5, even my 2 low achieving, so this one, the amount of DNA inside of a cell changes during interphase, specifically during S phase, which is much different than what he had answered on the first one, which was interphase makes double, then mitosis cuts the cell in half, making 2 new cells. So this focus student, one of my low achieving, was pretty much the same from beginning to end. But another focus student said at the beginning that as a cell splits, the chromosome adds up. But at the end of the day, end of the lesson, he was able to say when a cell starts to split, the DNA changes to make new cells by mitosis. So less detail than the high-achieving students, but still combining the information from the JTPS and the exit slip at the end of the unit show that they were retaining the knowledge. And they were also feeling more confident about it. In the same exit slip from the lesson on chromosomes, I had planned on simply asking them a summative question about the lesson, but instead decided to include a self-assessment and reflection because we had finished up new material for the unit and I wanted to know what I needed to focus on and reteach before the exam. What I learned was that I needed to be more specific with what I'm asking on the exit slip. I will, in the future, have them self-assess using the MAST rubric, which has very clear guidelines, and also have them defend their answer. That way it's through assessment for learning and they can actually think about how much they know and reflect and think about what they need to work on. There was active practice at the end of every lesson to get the students interacting with the material. Active practice is very important because Chickering and Gamson have shown that students must read, write, discuss, or be engaged in solving problems rather than just listening. The flipbook that I assigned during my focus lesson did not succeed how I had planned. That was not during my focus lesson. Flipbook that I assigned earlier in the unit did not succeed how I had planned. I was out of school for a retreat and the substitute did not understand my directions. I still feel as if the flipbook is a great tool to visualize mitosis, and because of this, I will next year make sure that the directions get through to the students. The most successful active practice that I saw from this unit was a mitosis review where they drew out each stage and labeled and explained what was happening in each of them. So here's the 3 stages of interphase and then the 5 stages of mitosis. 90% of students included everything that they were instructed to, and 60% of students chose this as the tool they wanted to use during their review later rather than their notes. So this was a very good review for them to look back on. All 5 of my focus students were able to complete it successfully, even my low achieving ones. And this combined with the fact that afterwards they all rated themselves as a 4 on their learning target logs shows that this activity was a success. Even my 2 low achieving students moved from a 2 on their learning target log for the learning target about the steps of mitosis. They moved from a 2 to a 4. So that shows that it really was a success. I closed the unit with a block on stations, a block period about stations, to review for the summative exam. Before we did the stations, I had the students reflect over their learning target logs and rate themselves as a green, yellow, or red based on how they felt about the mitosis material. Here I have a student who rated himself as green. I then used this for a differentiated station modeling mitosis. I got the idea for this station from observing Clara. She did not do this activity exactly, but I have twice observed her students modeling different processes using marshmallows, pipe cleaners, and other kinds of manipulatives. In the future, I will incorporate more differentiated stations, in addition to just one, as well as giving clear instructions at each station. I had to spend a lot of the class period explaining what to do at each station, rather than walking around and helping them guide their learning. After the stations, I decided to have students reflect in an exit slip about which stations were most helpful and how they felt they were going to perform on the test in addition to what they needed to study. Looking back, I should have made the questions more specific because 75% of students gave me very short replies without explanations. Most helpful station 4, most least helpful station 2, without telling me why. So in the future, I need to make sure that I ask them why. One of my low achieving students explained in very good detail why one station was helpful and stated very clearly what he needed to study. The other 4 simply stated that they needed to study mitosis and thought they would do well on the test, which combined well with their learning target logs after the review activity and after stations. The summative assessment was very successful, being that 90% of students passed and the measurable student outcome was met. So my 5 focus students and their 4s on the steps of mitosis, this clearly was true because they all did well on the summative exam. On Monday, tomorrow, my students will be reflecting and performing error analysis because this will help them on future assessments to be able to remember what didn't work and how they can do better next time, what mistakes they made this time and how they can avoid them next time. While reviewing their learning target logs, after all is said and done, I can see that the high-achieving students start off as 2 or 3s on most of the learning targets and have reached 80 to 100% of 4s by the end. The middle and lower achieving students took longer to achieve their highest levels. I had students rate themselves once or twice a week, but in the future I will have students reflect more deeply as well as simply rating themselves, like I said earlier. This should be a tool to help the students see what they need to focus on more, and so far it's just kind of something they do in the classroom. Next year, I will modify this block plan by combining different activities together and shortening the unit. By the end of the unit, students were beginning to get bored of drawing the steps of mitosis, and based on the questions I received in class, 50 to 60% of students were anxious to move on to genetics because they found that more interesting. I will in the future assign worksheets done in class for homework, and that way we can maximize class time and move through the unit more quickly. I should be assigning homework anyway, since research by Anderson has shown that mastery of an objective takes lots of practice over an extended period of time, and this can be achieved through homework. So overall, my measurable student outcome was met for 90% of students to pass their summative exam, thanks in large part to the MAST techniques.